those priority days were treated like sacrosanct in what they taught, right? It was like you protect these days at all costs. And I was like, okay, this is all right. This is how it has to be. And I slowly learned that like with some athletes, that's just not the case. I have a couple athletes that, God forbid, Tuesday was their priority day.
Well, and frankly, like there's some athletes who just feel better not coming off a rest day, which
Yes.
the strength conditioning world's like, like they're freaking out. And it's like,
I'm freaking out, man.
I mean, it's no different than like you put pressure on somebody in terms of like putting them on a time clock to lift. You know, you do like this conditioning piece before you go into your snatch max and you PR your lift. It's like, what the world? This should not be happening. And it's the same thing. It's like, again, if you're dealing with athletes who have a incredibly well developed aerobic system, along with they lift really efficiently and well, and they're super strong, and they're also enduring and have the aerobic qualities. It's like, even in the CrossFit world, you don't get those athletes all the time. Like it tends to be higher level CrossFit athletes who are like that.
Yep.
But then they're also the athletes who like, they just need to have more training and they need to have more priorities into their week to continue to get better. And the only way to do that is by giving them stuff that still matters, that maybe isn't like the highest priority, but it's still maybe not on like their quote unquote like priority day.
The fitness movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com.
Today we're going to be talking about priority training days, and we're going to be talking about it basically from the program design side of things, where Chris and I are coaches and we got athletes that we're writing for. So we're basically thinking about how do we organize their designs that in a way that makes sense, that get them the most progress as quickly as they can, and that leave them able to basically do the most productive training within a week that is reasonable for them. So basically we're going to jump into it. We're going to see where it goes. We don't have a super tight, stringent discussion outline by any means. So we're just going to kind of go into it and see where it goes. But I know, Chris, you've kind of talked about this before, where coming from your education background, it was like in terms of like the program design side of things, it was very you held to like the priority days pretty strongly. Mm-hmm. And again, I think generally that leads you pretty well, but like maybe explain like maybe the benefits of that, like the potential like drawbacks, and like where it kind of sits in your mind nowadays.
Yeah. So just to create a frame of reference, right? We're saying priority dates. Some people might not know what that means.
Yeah, we should
right?
probably define that first. That's a good point.
So essentially, guys, when you're looking at an athlete, right? Whether we like it or not, there are certain things you have to focus on to create adaptation, or certain things you're going to use as the driving forces for a training block, right? Like, hey, during this training block, we're really going to focus on these things over here, these things over here. You're pretty good at, so there maybe we're going to touch on them to maintain the skill, maintain your weights here. These things you're really good at, maybe we don't touch them all that often, every so often, right? And so once you kind of section out those priorities, right? So again, if we're looking at a CrossFit athlete, what they need to do to get better at, then what a priority day would be like, okay, those are the things we're going to put on those priority days, right? And so, to really dumb it down, let's say someone's a really bad back squatter and, they have poor, upper body pulling endurance, right? And so like on those priority days, one day you'll back squat and maybe you'll do pulling endurance in some capacity. The next day, maybe you do some sort of other squat variation and a different pulling variation, right? Again,
at a different time in the week, you're saying.
Exactly. Very, very, scaled down version of what really goes on in the thought process. But you would put those on those two priority days during the week, and those days tend to follow a rest day. And so the thought process is, hey, you have a rest day. You're going to be the most recovered going into that next day. So that's where you're going to have the most mental and physical energy to put into what your priorities are to get the best adaptation. So that's kind of the thought process behind it. Now, as Ben touched on, I think early on in my coaching career, I held on to that pretty tightly because that was like what I was taught in the education that I had. The longer I did this, the more I realized that thought process makes absolutely 100% perfect sense if you're dealing with robots. And there has to be more play than just this is how it is.
If you're lucky, you get one or two of those in your career.
Right. Where it's just like every, out of 52 Mondays, right? It's like, I felt great on 48 of them. Then it's like, great, we are on track, right? And so I've adapted to the point where like every athlete and every training cycle, in my opinion, needs those priority days in the sense of what is the focus? What do we need to work on? And prioritizing certain days in the week to work on those things. And then for me, I might put complementary skills on those days, right? Like maybe there's a day that, they really struggle with handstand pushups. I might find a hinging variation we can work on that day to go with it, right? Because hinging tends to partner well with upper body pushing or something like that. But I still hold to that there's two priority days. What I let go of or am able to manipulate and move around is when those things happen, right? It might not be after a rest day. It might also be something where it's like, and you know this, Ben, it's like, hey, I don't feel good today. I'm taking the day off. And it's like, okay, cool. But let's manipulate the rest of the week to make sure you still get touches on the skills we need to work on. So I think there's still, in my mind, still priority days or priority skills or priority aspects that I want to work on. How and when we fit it in, I'm less regimented than I was at the beginning of my career, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe for me, an example of that might be like, okay, I think about the athletes' priorities, like, okay, the next, and realistically, it doesn't go this way because people's priorities are the priorities for a lot longer than, 6 or 8 weeks or a cycle.
Right.
You're just trying to, okay, let's really move the needle on this priority in the next 8 weeks or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, one of the things I think about is like, how many touches reasonably can we get of, let's say it's upper body pulling and they need work of all hanging gymnastics of all kinds, right? Like ring muscle up, bar muscle up, toes to bar, chest to bar, like it all needs work. So it's like, okay, ideally, if we really want to push the volume and the intensity on those things in some aspect over, again, the next 6-8 weeks, then it's like we need to get as many spaced out touches that we can, because if we put them obviously on like a back-to-back day, that's just not going to go well. So it's like, right, in theory, let's say it's okay, it's every 48 hours we come back and touch that priority. It's like, okay, then the way you get the most touches is like you either do, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or something along those lines. And it's like, for most people, they're following the Thursday, Sunday, recovery day, rest day. It just seems to work well for a lot of people. So it's like, okay, let's go Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And it's like, it so happens that Monday, you're completely fresh because you're coming off a rest day. So hopefully that's like a strong priority day and that you feel good then. Same thing, Friday, you're coming off Thursday's like lower day. So you should be feeling pretty fresh. Wednesday, you might be feeling a little bit fatigued because that's literally the day before your recovery day. So it's like, okay, we can still work on that priority, but we might have to get a little bit creative in how we go about it, where you're getting maybe instead of all just like kipping work from the bar, it's like, okay, let's get some strict upper body pulling where we're doing, bent over rows with, a dumbbell or a lat pull down, or like more strict variations or accessory work for like the biceps and the lats and things like that, where you're still touching on all like the supporting things that are necessary to continue to drive that priority forward, but it's in a way that, just kind of you're respecting the fact that the athlete is going to be fatigued when they're actually doing that priority work.
Right. Yeah. Because you always, the other thing with these priorities, if they're skill-based, it's a little bit different, right? Because you can touch on skill-based things in an unfatigued setting, like pretty frequently. Yeah. Because it's more like learning how to execute the thing, right? It's like learning how to ride a bike. Yeah. You're not having to space out, having to learn how to ride a bike because the process is so physically fatiguing. My legs are shot. Like I can't even grip the handlebars. is no, you just fall down a lot and it's hard to figure out. So you just get up and keep trying, right? So if those are the priorities, you can touch them much more frequently. If the priority is like, I'm weak, and so like I'm a weak squatter specifically, which I feel like is super common in the sport, right? It's like, okay, well, I need to be able to both, recover with my central nervous system and my muscles and joints to be able to get as many touches as my body will allow me on that movement. Like that's something where it's like, okay, I really got to respect the bodily systems that go into recovery there, because it's more of a physical trait that I'm trying to change as opposed to a skill I'm trying to learn.
Yeah, and so Chris and I are both good examples of like someone who's trying to drive up strength, but then also like specifically squatting strength.
Yeah.
And so like I think likely if we just draw on our personal experiences of like what we've done that was worked well for us, like one of the things that's worked well for me is like, okay, like I said before, like I'm just gonna space out these touches as far apart as I possibly can and like drive up the volume as much as possible without getting to the point where I'm having joint irritation that spills over into that following session.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that could be where like you hit it on like, maybe for me it would be like Monday, Friday I could squat super heavy, and it's like, okay, that's only twice a week, so I'm going to be able to handle more volume and intensity on those days. Whereas there's other times where maybe I decide, okay, I'm going to go Monday AM first thing where I'm super fresh. I'm going to do Wednesday PM even though I'm going to be tired. I'll do some like secondary knee flexion strength work that's going to again allow me to kind of drive that forward, knowing that hopefully that's enough space in between there where I don't have a lot of knee irritation. And then maybe, Saturday morning or Friday morning, I come back and hit that one more time. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to drive the volume or the intensity quite as much in either of those or any of those sessions because it's more touches, but you're getting more touches. So that could just be like a matter of a practice thing. So I guess what I'm trying to illustrate there is like there's a number of ways that you can skin the cat, but if you're and it's hard to explain also like what the thought process is behind that, but like a lot of it's just like coach's intuition. Like you've been doing this for a long time.
100%.
Like, I've seen this work well for people with like your age, your body type, your this and that, and like just kind of like my gut tells me this is right.
Well, and not only that, but it's like that's where kind of the nuance of programming comes in, where like, that Wednesday session you just talked about is a priority session, right? And if the priority is, or you could use that as a session to work on something priority related, not necessarily like those standard priority sessions like I laid out.
Yep.
But it's like, okay, if I need to work on squatting strength, like Mondays and Fridays maybe are those days. Well, maybe that Wednesday I'll work on something that's priority related, but you talked about joint pain, right? Again, specifically knee pain, it's like right above the kneecap, tendonitis type, like sharp pain. Like in varying degrees, I've spilled over to that at some point, right? But I think when you utilize that session as like, okay, I'm going to do certain accessory exercises that are shown to help prevent that from happening so that I can maximize those two sessions, I think is also a way to go about it. So for you, Ben, is that something you lay out during your week now? I mean, I think we both kind of touched on in the beginning how we looked at priority days or priority skills. How do you kind of look at things now?
Yeah, I mean, I start with like, what's the most important thing right now? So if an athlete's in like, and again, I'm probably taking this from the perspective of more so competitive athletes. So if they're a competitive athlete and they're in off season, I don't really care as much about the demands of the sport. I care about where they sit relative to the competitive field in like different patterns, basically, or different energy systems. Yeah. So again, if it's more of an off season or just like, let's call it not pre-competition phase, it's like, okay, like where do you have a deficit relative to the field? So it's like, okay, if this was me, it would be like, okay, I got to continue to work on my strength numbers kind of across the board, but especially, hip, knee centric movements and, top end power in some aspects. And then like, just kind of like staying a little bit sharp on like all the stuff that I could neglect if I go too far into those priorities. So in that instance, it's like, okay, that's actually not crazy. It's like I have my weightlifting numbers or weightlifting movements like snatch and clean and jerk variations. I got squatting variations, and I just try to jigsaw that into the week where I get as much quality work in as I can, and again, navigate where, you know, I feel okay actually lifting, like morning versus evening, and spacing that out. That kind of makes sense. And then it's like just kind of squeeze the other work in all around that stuff. And that's the same thing as it gets if I maybe use an athlete that's different as they like approach a competition. It's like now I'm looking at the competition. I'm saying what do they need to be ready for at this competition or like in this online qualifier. And it's like the only way that you know that is if you have other data points that you can look back to and like say, okay, this competitive testing body tends to test, I just did the TFX online qualifier, and it was like, okay, every single year and 1 year twice, they had a row couplet. It was just row and something else, and it's always row calories and something else. And it's like, sure enough, it showed up again in 2024. So I was like,
yep.
Every single week, I made sure that I put that, like this is a like sort of a mandatory touch, let's call it, and I put that into, I think it was like a Wednesday evening, which is right before my rest day, because a couple like that's gonna be super draining. So I was like, okay, we put that there, and that's like one thing, and it's like, okay, that's not like a priority necessarily that you would attack in the off season. It'd be more like, okay, let's do like more aerobic threshold row intervals or something. It'd be worded different. It wouldn't be like a row couplet in a Metcon like tester thing. So, and then it's like just a matter of like finding other priorities that make sense. And then also, like I said before, it was like in the off season, it was sort of flipped where it was like, okay, I am just having these minimal touches, like minimal effective dose, let's call it, like maintenance work of the CrossFit stuff. Now that gets flipped where it's like I'm trying to get as much quality CrossFit stuff in as I can without losing the touches on the absolute strength stuff or like some of those odds and ends and like quality skill work that could easily get thrown away if you're just trying to Metcon a lot. So it gets flipped around, but the one thing's the same is like, okay, I'm trying to get as much quality work as I can spread out throughout my week, with a lot of it being kind of geared towards those priority days coming off a rest day. And then everything else is just sort of jigsaw around based on my, experience, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point right there, is obviously, dialing things down and up. When I was competing competitively, Ben and I kind of had similar needs, right? But I found in the off season, like conditioning, like maybe twice a week was like best. I found that if I conditioned twice a week in some capacity, whether it was a CrossFit style workout, interval style workout, it was enough that when the season came around, I could ramp up and be in good shape. But anything more than that, my strength gains were just like it was even more of a slog than it was normally, right? But I think for me, that, like I said, with my education, those days were like, and I'll just say it, I went through the OPEX education process, and it was like those priority days were treated like sacrosanct in what they taught, right? It was like you protect these days at all costs, and I was like, okay, this is all right. This is how it has to be, and I slowly learned that like with some athletes, that's just not the case, right? Like I have a couple athletes that, God forbid, Tuesday was their priority day, right? It was because...
Well, and frankly, like there's some athletes who just feel better not coming off a rest day, which...
Yes.
It's like the strength conditioning world's like, like they're freaking out. And it's like...
I'm freaking out, man!
Yeah. I mean, it's no different than like, you put pressure on somebody in terms of like putting them on a time clock to lift. And it's like, you do like this conditioning piece before you go into your snatch max and you PR your lift. And it's like, what the world? This should not be happening. And it's the same thing. It's like, again, if you're dealing with athletes who have an incredibly well-developed aerobic system, along with they lift really efficiently and well, and they're super strong, and they're also enduring and have the aerobic qualities, it's like, even in the CrossFit world, you don't get those athletes all the time. Like it tends to be higher level CrossFit athletes who are like that.
Yep.
But then they're also the athletes who like, they just need to have more training and they need to have more priorities into their week to continue to get better. And the only way to do that is by giving them, like stuff that still matters, that maybe isn't like the highest priority, but it's still maybe not on like their quote unquote like priority day.
Right. Or even to the effect of like, there's there's a lot of people who have things that it's like, okay, we can work on this, but for whatever reason, you just recover from this super easily, right? Like I had an old coach back in the day, Kyle Spears. He used to say that upper body bodybuilding was like vegetables for me. Like I could do it every single day and it would not affect my next day whatsoever. Whereas like my legs or like if I had heavy squats, I would wake up like, man, I am so tired. Like my CNS and like my couldn't handle hitting like certain high percentages all the friggin' time.
Yeah.
And like, or if I did a ton of squatting work, like my hips would just hurt. It was just like, so there are certain things you could do and an athlete can recover from pretty quickly. And it's finding that out, right? And I've always found that's why they're principles, right? They're not hard laws. And so I think if you're a coach with a new athlete, I think it is good sound practice to say, okay, hey, I'm going to start by putting these priority sessions, if they have a standard Monday, Wednesday, Friday, rest day, Thursday, Sunday, on Monday and Friday, right? With maybe a touch on something similar on Wednesday. And then as you go, if you find that like you have an athlete that has a hefty work schedule on the weekend, so they always come in Monday tired, and it's like, okay, let's make Monday an easy day to just get you into your training week, hit it hard on Tuesday, hit it hard on Wednesday, rest day on Thursday, right? I think it's cool to start in the one spot and then learn and develop and adapt as you get to know your athlete.
Yeah. And that's like why we have athletes give us feedback. It's because like
100%.
That's why you see that. It's like these questions would basically be impossible to answer if you didn't have a real person in front of you. It's like, should this person be deadlifting on their priority day or should they be doing it on their day before the rest day? And it's like, you could really justify either one of those and probably be right with one. And if you communicate it correctly to your athlete, it could probably be super effective regardless. And it's like, but if you realize that like, oh, the athlete's telling me that they feel like trash every Tuesday morning when they go to do their next session because they deadlifted on Monday night and they're trying to crawl out of bed with a stiff back and go do their burpees, it's not going to go super well. It's like, okay, you realize, okay, 3 weeks in a row, we saw the Tuesday session in the morning just didn't go well. It's like, well, guess what we're going to do? We're going to switch up that. We're either going to change the Monday night one or you got to change the Tuesday morning one. It's like something's got to be different. So either you give them a low session in the morning or you pull back something about the deadlifts or you move them to, the session before rest day, which is like something I like to do a lot. So.
Sure.
Yeah, that was one more thing that we had kind of talked about off air was like, one of the things that I've started incorporating is like, there's again certain things that maybe ideally would fit somewhere else in the week, but because a CrossFit athlete's just trying to get so much training in, you don't want whatever you're having that basically occurs before like they have like this big bulk of their sessions in the week. So for example, like say they train Monday through Wednesday, and you got 3 big days in a row, and it's like, say they're training, I don't know, so they're training 6 sessions in that time, right? They're doing double days every single day. And it's like, if you give them, like that example I just used, like you have them deadlift on Monday night, they could be very easily trashed for the entirety of Tuesday. And also like, then like not feeling like they're in a great place when they get to, Wednesday and they're still not like feeling like they've gotten a lot of quality training in just because they've been affected from that the entire time. So like, I think deadlift would be a good example of that. Where it's just something that is like there's so much shear on the back that it tends to make people really sore. And again, that's not everybody, but in my experience, that's been a lot of people. It's like just super CNS taxing. They're tired, and they also have like joint stuff going on the next session that they basically go back to. And similarly, I think like something like if you just like fry somebody's grip, like. Some athletes just have are like grip limited where you're going to give them like a bunch of gymnastics work and then you're also going to give them like something that's, interfering, like, okay, you're doing farmer's carries and chest to bars. And it's like, okay, the next morning you have snatch singles up to 95%. It's like, they just like can't hang on to the bar.
Yep.
It's like, so again, that's something where it's like so much of what you do in CrossFit is gripping that it makes sense to probably hold that off to like, okay, let's go like Wednesday night, the last day before your recovery day and like Saturday night, the last basically session before your rest day. It's like, okay, on those times, let's just like fry your grip because you're going to get like 36 to 48 hours off and you'll have time to recover at that point.
Yep, for sure.
I mean, is there anything else that you find yourself putting towards maybe the opposite end, like furthest from like their entry point to like a training week? So like basically priority day would be coming off like, it's like traditionally coming off like, you know, their Sunday rest day, Monday would be their priority. Is there anything that you find yourself like programming as like either Saturday, like the day before the rest day, or like Wednesday, which is like typically, again, if we're just using like the general example of
I think
before recovery day?
I think Saturday or Wednesday is for me when I would stereotypically program like, so again, we're talking CrossFit athletes.
Yeah.
Like they're pure CrossFit style conditioning.
Yep.
So I call it sport specific conditioning. So it's like, if I have an athlete who, you know, Saturday is an easy one, right? Because most athletes won't train as much on a Saturday as they do the rest of the week. So it's like, okay, cool. We're coming off of priority day. You know, let's play around with some things. You can also have some interference where it's like, okay, yeah, we did this yesterday, but the volume wasn't too high. So we can hit it again today because again, come the sport, you know, like there's some competitions, 2-day competitions, like I squatted the entire time yesterday and now I got to do it again. It's like, so not that you would do that all the time, but every once in a while it's okay to do that because of the demands of the sport. So that's one thing I tend to see put on a Monday or a Wednesday or a Saturday is like your sport specific style conditioning.
That's the reason we have the name game on Saturday.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing. You know, I usually don't do any real positional work on like a Saturday. So like not really a lot of Olympic lifting positional work or things like that. I just find that for most people at the end of the week, you're pretty tired. And so it's like, you can find ways to push up someone's capacity. However, in skill-based stuff like that, you want conditions to be, you want those positions to be able to be absorbed and then, you know, reflected in later training. But if you don't do those at the right time, you can actually hammer home poor positions. So I usually don't throw those on those days, but a deadlift is also another good one I like on Wednesdays. Simply because again, right, it is tough on someone's CNS and on their joints. And having a day after recover is probably optimal for a movement like that for sure.
Yeah. The other one that I added was like, and this probably is in the same vein as like the hard CrossFit sport work, is like hard energy systems training. Like, there's energy systems training that can be done that's still taxing because it is energy systems training and by the nature of it is tough. But it's almost like weightlifting positional work. Like that's tough, but I don't like walk away from it being like, oh my gosh. Whereas like you can do the same thing with energy systems training where you can walk away and be like, wow, I was breathing hard there. Like my heart rate was up, and it's like 5 minutes later, I feel normal and I feel like I can like I feel good. Whereas like you can also do energy systems training that's like Tim Paulson on the bike and you're ready to throw up the whole time and you're, you know, hyperventilating and you're dying for the entirety of the thing. And it's like, I am messed up for 2 hours afterwards and I can't focus on my computer. And it's like, that's also a reality of like what you're dealing with sometimes. And that's something that it takes a little bit longer to come back from, just as I was mentioning. So it makes sense to put that on the tail end of whatever, training split you got.
Yeah. And I think that also speaks to your athlete as well, right? Like you might have someone that can get to that very place, but they're naturally more like fast twitch fiber types. And so like they might actually recover from that faster than if you did like a 60-minute, zone 2, maybe not zone 2, but you know what I'm trying to say, like a long 60-minute aerobic session where it's like, hey, you want to hover around 80%. It's actually harder for them to operate in that zone because they're so like high turnover type individuals. So knowing that about your athlete as well, that it's like people who tend to just naturally be towards that side of things can recover quicker from intensity usually than they do from volume. And then you have some other people that are naturally will err towards the slower twitch side of things that will recover way easier from volume. And if you tap them into that intensity, it's like, dude, I can't even think straight. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Like, I think some of that just comes down to like mentality, like what someone's mentally like kind of used to. And it's like, and part of that's just like their giftedness too, like their essence. Like if you're just a powerful person, like you're going to want to do sprint work and you're not going to want to sit on a bike for, 30, 60, 75 minutes.
Yeah.
Whereas like for me, like those are some of like my best PM sessions are for like I just sat on the bike easy for like 45, 60 minutes. I was like,
right.
Just kind of moving. And it's like, oh man, I feel super fresh and ready to go. It's like somebody else, it's like that zapped every ounce of mental, emotional bandwidth that they had. Cause it's like, oh my gosh, coach made me sit on the assault bike for 45 minutes this morning. And they're like ready to die. And it's like, what's so hard about sitting on a bike and spinning easy for 45 minutes? And they,
yeah.
But yeah, some people are just built different mentally as well. So sweet. We'll leave it there. If people got questions, reach out to us. Ben@zorfitness.com. My email, Chris@zorfitness.com. Or on Instagram @zorfitness. But thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.